And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, co-owner over at webchoiceuk.com. And today I'm joined by Shruti Kapoor. She's the founder and CEO over at Wingman. Wingman records, transcribes, and analyzes sales calls in real time, give insights on what's working in the sales process and nudges to improve your calls. Shruti, warm welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Sam.
No problems at all. Looking forward to this. So we're going to be talking all about how you can get your very first 10 customers as a startup. And I'm sure there's a lot of people watching or listening today that are either recently started their business or perhaps they're thinking in the back of the mind in the next few months, the next few years, I really want to start my own company, but I'm so nervous. I'm so apprehensive when it comes to how do I acquire those customers, or perhaps people have got a business on the side and they want to accumulate a few customers before they're ready to take the leap and go out on their own. So this is going to provide some juicy insights as you've been there, you've done it, Shruti, into how they do that. But before we get to that, I want to talk about some of the most common mistakes that you've seen that startups make when it comes to selling, when it comes to sales in general.
Yeah, I think, of course, as a very early startup, I don't know if you've read the book, like the mom test, right? I think startups make that mistake even in that selling process, which is you go and reach out to people and you try and sell to people just because you know them, right?
Right.
You might know that they're not the ICP for your product, but just because, they're in your network, you're like, you know what, this is going to be an easy customer. Let me go out and get them first.
Okay.
And that's a big mistake because one, you don't learn from the feedback that they give you, and they will give you feedback, right? Because you're just launching your product or service, and you will then either land up not learning or you will land up learning the wrong things. Because they're going to tell you stuff that is not really relevant to your actual ICP, right? So suppose you were launching, say a B2C product for like 20-year-old men. And
Yep.
instead you went and if you're a 30-year founder, you went and asked your own friends about it. They might have very, very different, budget. Their priorities might be different, and you'll get feedback that doesn't apply to your segment.
Got it. Okay. So that's interesting because we've had a lot of people that have come on the show and said you should leverage your immediate network. So I like the fact that it's massively different, and we're saying no, don't go to your friends, don't go to your network, go to your actual ideal customer profile. And is that purely, Shruti, because they're more likely to buy a product, and also they'll friends and perhaps people that we're in close contact with already are less likely as well to give us honest and pure feedback. They're rather going to stroke our egos and perhaps go lightly on what they really think.
So I think there are two parts to it, right? One is you should still go to your network, right? Like,
Right.
so when I think about, how do you get your first 10 customers, I think the network plays a really important role in that. But it's important to kind of be aware that what you should still qualify people based on the ICP that you're looking for, right? So, for example, a mistake that I see a lot of other founders in SaaS make is they kind of go to their local market, even though they know that their target market is the US, right? So you
Right.
start with interviewing folks in whichever country you live in, right? Like in our case, we could easily get access to, say, 30 ICP people within India, but it was probably harder for us to get that same access to folks in the US, right? So it's easy for me to go out there and say, let me just go with them. And, it can't be so different, and I'll be aware of what those differences might be. But it's never that straightforward, right? Like there's so many nuances, those little things, whether that is cultural context, whether that is maturity of the tech stack, everything else makes a difference into what people actually do with the product. So yeah, I would say that, if you're lucky enough to have your immediate network be your ICP, by all means, go with it. But
Yep.
Don't just go with someone because they're in your network.
Got it. No, that makes sense. So I suppose it's about leveraging what you've got already, but refining that network to make sure you're actually tapping into, I guess, the ideal fit prospects, and make sure you're not wasting their and your own yourself your time or your sales team time if you've got a sales team, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, that makes sense. So, are there any other kind of mistakes we need to be aware of when it comes to selling, whether it is from the founder side or whether it is you've got a small team side or anything perhaps you've experienced, Shruti, that could perhaps give us a few shortcuts?
Yeah, I think the second mistake, and I learned this from other founders as well. The second mistake that a lot of people make is when they start selling, they take that word selling really seriously, right? So
Right.
they feel that when they get on a call with somebody who's a potential customer, what they need to be doing is they need to be talking and selling the idea. But instead, what you need to be doing is you need to be actually probing and understanding the problems that your customer is facing.
Yep.
And so, like, literally, I think I went on 50 calls with prospects, and I was talking to another founder, and they said, "What is the first thing you say on a call?" And I said, I introduce myself, and then I start saying why I created this great product, and then I go into it. And what he told me was that the first question literally has to be, "Why did you get on the call with me?" Right? And I think that's such an important piece of advice for everybody, and it's a simple piece of advice that I think holds true for everyone.
Yep.
Because that is going to tell you the true motivation, right? Like, yes, you might have literally begged them to get on that call with you, but still it was a choice that they made, right? Like, they could have spent their 30 minutes in 30 different ways. But since they're there, they're probably looking to get something out of it. And that's, such a big insight when you get into it. And I would say that that's kind of, the second biggest mistake people make, especially when you're not from the sales world and discovery and everything seems just very strange and artificial.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That is a huge mistake, isn't it? When you just jump on calls and it's all me centric. You just want to talk about yourself, your product, how great you are. And if you've been in sales for more than 5 minutes, you'll realize that that's an immediate turn off for prospects, right? So I love that question. Why did you decide to get on the call with me? Because I guess that kind of unpacks and really tees off the conversation because they'll give you some golden nuggets, some useful advice onto what intrigued them, I guess, about your product or your offering that you can leverage later along the sales process, right?
Yeah. And I think, like, if I had to add the third and maybe the last mistake that a lot of people make is, it's related to the second one, which is when they start thinking about the company, they also start thinking about it from the perspective of the product or the solution, right?
Right.
They don't, and so, the whole timeline of how you think about the company is, okay, I have this great idea. Now maybe if I was smart enough, I've done some initial interviews. Now it's time for me to go and build that product out. And so, literally the order is, okay, I build the product, then I try and get some initial customers by doing sales. And then at some point later in the future, I think about marketing, right? But in fact, the order should actually be reversed, because if you get your marketing piece right early on, that can give you so much leverage in making the product and the sales process faster, and you can learn so much more. And of course, in the early days, while you're still trying to figure out the product, it's not about putting fancy screenshots of wireframes on your website. It's more about just starting out the conversation around the problem that you're looking to solve, right? Because, and again, this kind of ties also to the marketing funnel, right? Like, there are a lot more people who understand a problem than people who are necessarily aware of a solution or looking for a solution. So even when you think about marketing in those early days, and I think you should start doing marketing like pretty much, even before you launch a company or write your first line of code. That's kind of where I think a lot of people make that mistake.
Yeah, great advice. Do you think that founders of companies, let's use B2B SaaS as an example, because I know that's what you guys offer. Do you think they often know the problem that they solve when they bring it to market? Or do you think they're often perhaps wrong or not quite right when it comes to actually really understanding the crispy exact problem that their customers are coming to them to solve?
Um, I think there are people on the entire range of that spectrum. And the other part of it really is that people might understand that the problem that they want to solve, but the solution that they have in mind might not actually solve that problem, right? It might create a different problem that then needs to get solved, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I think it's important, therefore, also to kind of lead with the problem and to keep iterating on the problem itself. Because you're right, I might start off by saying that this is the problem I want to solve. A few months later, when I actually have maybe an MVP of the product and I see people using it, I realize that either maybe the product doesn't solve that problem as well as I'd imagined, or I realize that maybe people are actually using it differently from what I imagined, and they're using it to solve a different problem that maybe is more tied to what they do, right? Like, just to give you an example, like we at Wingman, like you mentioned, we record, transcribe, and analyze sales calls. One of the things that we noticed early on was that while people, when we interviewed people, they said, yes, the greatest thing they would want to be able to do is coach sales teams if they had a product like that. But what we realized people doing was that they were actually using it to coach for deals, not necessarily to coach people. All right. And then the product, in some sense, needs to evolve to say that, okay, yes, while coaching is great and people want to do it, it's not something that happens as often as people would like to do. But something that absolutely happens every week is pipeline reviews and coaching on deals, right? And so if you can combine both, then you bring much more value to the customer. So yeah, I think it's important to kind of keep iterating on that problem statement as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like constantly or regularly talking to your customers to understand kind of what they want to get out of it, how it's helping them, the problems they're facing. So not being afraid to, I guess, tweak your messaging, tweak your marketing, tweak your sales pitches even, I suppose, because ultimately the customers are the ones that are going to be buying your product. So you want to make sure it's as close to the actual feedback you're getting from your current customers and as to the problems, how it's helping them, how it's kind of making their business, their lives better, and making sure that's on point. Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, that's some good stuff around kind of problem solving and making sure your messaging resonates with ideal customers you want to be tapping into. Are there any, I don't want to go too deep into this, but as we've covered on some episodes before, but are there any kind of real quick ways for perhaps businesses now that are thinking, I just want a fairly quick way to understand kind of the best or crispiest problem that I solve? Have you got any tips, Shruti, when it comes to kind of gathering that intel from perhaps your existing customers or new ones?
Yeah, so we in fact went through another round of this exercise, and I think it's an exercise that's important to do every 6 months at least. The way we went about it was to try and understand how people, what is the job to be done, right? And people might have heard the jobs to be done framework. And the way we started by saying, how do we identify what are the jobs to be done, is we would literally go back. And of course, since we use Wingman internally, we have access to thousands of customer calls with our prospects. We went back and said, let's just go and listen to 50 calls in the last few months and just listen to the first 5 minutes that people are talking about that particular topic, which is, the answer to that question, why did you get on this call today? Right. And that's where we kind of started realizing what those jobs were. And what we then did, and there's another framework that we used for this exercise called the value prop canvas, where we would then start with saying, okay, this is the problem. This is the job that somebody wants to do. Now, what happens if they're not able to do that job, right? Which is what you would call pain. And what happens if they're able to do that job, right? And also, why are they not able to do that job today, right? So as an example, if I'm selling to a VP of sales and they say that they are not able to coach their sales teams today, my question is why are you not able to coach your sales teams? And what is kind of the risk if you're not able to coach your sales team, right? And people might have an answer like, okay, there is churn, and my teams, I don't hit quota. Then that kind of really gives you insights into saying, okay, what is the real impact of what I'm trying to build? And that second layer of question also begins to help you think about, other features within the product, right? Because sometimes the problem might be a little too abstract or the job might be abstract.
Right.
And we kind of do the same, the canvas also suggests this, which is to do the same exercise, starting with your product instead of starting with the customer, And then you kind of do a matchmaking, right? So you start with your product features. You then say, what is the gain that this feature creates? What is the pain that this feature solves for? And then you try and map your product features, pains and gains with the customer pains and gains. And then you kind of begin to get a much better idea, not just of what to build today or in the future, but also how to market and position that. So that's, I think, a really good hack to
Mm.
doing this. And we, in fact, plan to do this for every new feature that we launch so that you kind of understand how that process works.
Yeah. So really digging deep into kind of the problems that prospects, customers are facing, and then understanding the impact. So what happens if they don't fix it? Why is it an issue to their business? And then making sure you align your product features to basically fix those pains, I guess. Good.
Exactly.
Good stuff. So moving this forward, um, I'm sure you've seen this a lot, Shruti. Some founders that I've seen as well, they love selling, love talking to new prospects. They might love prospecting on the phone, via email. They might get inbound leads via their marketing, whatever. And then they've got no problem at all prospecting, getting leads in, putting them through the sales process and getting deals over the line. Other founders might be completely on the other side. They might be great technically when it comes to product build. They might know everything about the product, how to launch it, create it, how to work with a team. But when it comes to selling, they might be scared stiff. Have you got any advice for perhaps someone who's on the other end of the spectrum who actually dreads the thought of kind of getting on the phone to new prospects, of how to get stuck in and familiar with the selling role, especially when you're in a startup? Just to put you on the spot.
Yeah, I think it's not easy, and it's definitely a little bit of a personality thing, right? And I think when in whichever situation you feel that you're not naturally gifted, the way to compensate for it is with practice and with resources. And literally, the one piece of advice is that this is something that you cannot outsource in the early stages, right? And by outsource, I don't just mean like to some other agency, but like even to somebody else on the team. Like you have to do
Right.
this as a founder. And I know of many people who've made that mistake. We've also partially made those mistakes ourselves in this journey. Now, when you're getting on that conversation, I think it's important to then break that journey up in your mind. What happens is that very often as founders, we're really excited about the product, right? That's the thing that we are truly passionate about. Everything else to us comes second, right? Like whether that's the prospect, whether that's their pain points, even revenue comes second, right? Like you just
Right.
want people to start using that great thing that you're building. And so it's important to break that journey up and be disciplined about it to say that, listen, at the end of the first call, my objective is not necessarily to get this person to be using my product, right? At the end of that first call, what should my objective be? And that, I think, really helps in managing expectations and in keeping that conversation a little bit more lightweight,
Okay.
because when I go in and I say, you know what, the objective from this conversation for me is to actually understand this person's problem a little bit deeper, or my objective from this conversation is to make sure that I show them enough value or understanding of the problem that they will get on another call with me, then that conversation changes and I don't put so much pressure on myself. So I would say that that's probably one hack, which is to kind of break it up into saying, with this particular meeting or call, what I'm doing is I'm selling the next meeting or interaction, right? And whether that's like I'm going to send you an email, is that person going to ever respond to my email? So I think that's kind of one way to think about it.
Yeah, love that. So just not putting pressure on yourself that you need to close a deal, but rather thinking, look, am I going to have a good conversation with this prospect? I guess if it's an early sales call, depending on the length and the sales cycle, the sales process, and how long it might take, are we going to take the time to understand kind of if there is a problem that we can solve, or if we're later in the process and perhaps doing a presentation or pitch or demo, are we going to make sure we show them the right value to all the questions we uncovered and all the issues we uncovered earlier in the sales process, rather than just kind of thinking, like, I need to get this deal, I need to get this deal. Let's have like you said, a lighter conversation. So I guess it doesn't kind of stress you down and doesn't stress out the buyer at the same time.
Exactly.
Cool.
And then you can actually have more meaningful, open conversations.
Great. Good stuff. All right. So let's wrap this up with how we can put all this that we've learned, and feel free to leverage some marketing points if you wish, or we can keep it towards sales, on how we can use all this knowledge, all this intel to acquire our very first 10 customers. What if we want to do a step by step, or what are some of the things that we need to do to make sure we actually get some customers on board and get some cash in the bank, all importantly?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think the first thing in that journey of getting your early customers is to remember that the thing that is, going against you the most as a startup is not, whether your product is the best or anything else, right? The thing that is going against you really is the lack of trust, right?
Right.
And so what you're trying to solve for is trying to solve for trust. And if you think of the journey with that perspective, it gives you a lot of clarity, and it gives you a very different set of levers that you want to play around with, right? So when you're trying to get your first 10 customers, you're not trying to convince them that this is the best product that they can ever have in the world for solving that problem, because it's probably not going to be, right? Like, let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
And so why should they buy from you, right? And that kind of also ties back to the reason why you cannot outsource that to anybody else, but you have to do that as the founder. People are going to buy it from you, fortunately or unfortunately, because of you, right? And so you need to really be prepared to put yourself out there, and whether that is leveraging your network with the ICP, or using a network to get to the ICP if you don't already have access to it. That's probably how you should try and get maybe your first 2 or 3 customers,
Okay.
because they are trusting not the product, but they have some basis of trusting you more than others, right?
Just to dive into that a bit deeper, you feel free to use yourself or any contacts you know as an example. Does that, I mean, when I hear network, being in the B2B world and being on LinkedIn more than I ever should, checking notifications like mad, does that mean we hop onto LinkedIn, or does that mean we perhaps call our existing contacts or email them, or what does that really look like?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and I think that kind of maybe needs to be broken up in a process of its own, right?
Okay.
I would say that first you need to get on, maybe not just LinkedIn, right? Like, you need to
Hmm.
actually have conversations with your first circle of people who you think are going to be believers in you. They
Yeah.
might not be your ICP, right? You're having those conversations with them not to sell them the idea, but to just let them know that this is what you're working on and this is the type of people that you want to connect with, right?
Gotcha.
I would say that, like, if you went and had that conversation with 10, strong sponsors in your life, each of them, or at least half of them, will be able to give you like a couple of people that they believe you can talk to, right? And that's how you would start that conversation, and you can actually kind of lower the bar for them, right? And let them know that you're not going to try and sell to these people. Maybe you're just going to co-build with them. You're kind of going to get feedback, get a little bit deeper, and then you also don't want them to kind of feel that their relationship is going to be at stake at the end of that. Um, so I would say that, maybe instead of like going really broad and doing a spray and pray approach
Yeah.
early on, it's helpful to actually have those conversations, spend some time talking to people, evangelizing about it, and getting, the first set of 10 conversations set up. The other tip that somebody gave me and that came really handy was, and this was of course pre-pandemic, when you could actually go meet people in coffee shops,
Yeah.
right? It
Sure.
would be like, you would meet somebody in the coffee shop and they would tell you like, that's, the first 10 people that your contacts are connected you with. And they said, oh yeah, you know what? I know somebody else who might find this useful. So have your kind of message ready for asking for that connect. So the problem that often happens is, I speak to people all the time today on the other side where they're like, hey, is this interesting to you? And I'll be like, you know what, this is not interesting to me, but I know of a couple of people who might find this interesting. And then, they go quiet and maybe they reach out to me like 3 days later when I've actually forgotten maybe the initial context, right? So the
Yep.
second tip is to kind of have that message ready with a very clear small ask saying, hey, you know what, you mentioned that you can introduce me to these 2 people. Here is a quick excerpt of what you can tell them about the company, and can you make the introduction, right? So again, be prompt. And the third kind of part of that process is uh, don't feel bad if somebody forgets, doesn't respond, and that doesn't mean that you just kind of let them off the hook. Feel free to follow up, right? This is your life. This is going to be the most important thing for you and you alone. It's not going to be the most important thing for anybody else in the world, right? So you kind of have to kind of up the game and keep the stakes high for yourself, and don't don't take offense, don't take no for an answer. So I would say that's kind of the first set of things to do to
Yep.
maybe have like those first 30, 40 conversations. And ideally, out of those 30, 40 conversations, you should be able to get maybe two or three people who are willing to give you a chance.
That's awesome. The fruit is in the follow up, right? So
It is absolutely in the follow up.
really like that breakdown. That's an interesting way to look at it. So basically, it sounds like we're looking at a low friction ask to whether our friends, our contacts, and just making them aware of what our business is offering. I guess who it can potentially help, and then perhaps half of the people we speak to will then have some intros for us, which then we can have an initial conversation with. May lead to sales opportunities, may not. If not, at least you get great feedback on your product. If it does, great, you might have a potential customer, and then just making sure that we follow up with those potential leads effectively to get some initial kind of 2-3 or so deals over the line. That's great stuff. Okay, so we've done that. What are some of the next things we should consider?
Yeah, so it's exactly like at every stage you kind of think of it as a pyramid, right? So you maybe had one person who might have known two people who you then asked for another
Gotcha.
couple of intros, and so now you have your first three customers, and now you need to kind of jump to the next stage of trust building, right? So the first stage of trust building was all about people who knew you, who from your background felt that they could trust you, or they knew somebody who felt that they could trust you, right?
Yep.
Now you need to kind of abstract out that trust to the second layer. And to abstract that trust out, what you need to do is you need to use these people and their feelings about the product to build trust with the next set of people.
Okay.
So it's really important to work closely with maybe these three people and get case studies and testimonials, video testimonials, whatever you can,
Yep.
where they talk about the product and how it has helped them, right?
Gotcha.
What people do is sometimes they just kind of keep going down that funnel of like, using network over and over and over again to kind of get the early customers. But what that does is two things. One, like you said, right, like the network might not give you the most honest feedback. And two, you also don't want to wear out your network, right?
Yep.
So I think that once you have, those first three, four customers, you should move to the second part of it, which is then again focus on the product building, focus on making these people successful, and using them to kind of then amplify the voice, not just of yourself, but of the product and the value that it brings. So I would say that that's the kind of stage to switch and do case studies. And I know that in the early days, when you're like maybe a team of three or four people, doing case studies might seem like priority number 35, but it's actually something that you can do relatively easily. Right, like today you can ask people to go just write reviews for you on G2 if they've liked the product. Get them to maybe get on a call like this, do a video interview with them that you can then use for video testimonials.
Yep.
You can start off with simple things like that, but you kind of really have to move to phase two of trust building.
Yep. Awesome. Awesome stuff. So I think that's probably something that gets forgotten a lot, right? I suppose, especially if you're a founder and you've got 100 things on your plate, whether that's sorting out your product, sorting out your team, making sure everything is going right, there's no technical issues, and then at the same time, you've got to think about marketing and you've got to think about selling. Perhaps once you've got your three customers, you completely forget that getting that social proof, getting those testimonials or those review videos or those case studies or whatever that looks like is so important, because as we've talked about on other episodes, they don't only help in the sense of they build trust with prospects that are perhaps checking out your website, but they can also be really good, like we've alluded to the whole episode, for actually literally taking the words from your customers' mouths on how they describe your product to then use on your sales calls, right? As that could be storytelling, as in how you had a case study of you took someone from having various issues of pain and then your product came along, you had a conversation with them, and now this is the world that they're living in and the better place that they are now, and many other examples of that. So that's really good stuff. Okay, so that's all good. Is there further things that we need to do, or is that how we're going to get most of our 10 customers, or are there other pieces to the puzzle?
No, I think this is it for the first 10 customers. And then, of course, the third stage of trust building, which comes maybe at a bigger scale, is,
Yeah.
instead of your customers speaking about you, you then maybe have like external validation, like, G2 badges, a Gartner recognition of some sort, as ways for building trust. But, one way to kind of think about how you scale the company is to think of it in abstracter and more abstract ways of building trust with customers.
Awesome. Brilliant stuff. Well, Shruti, really enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks very much for coming on and sharing some really actionable, no BS useful tips for anyone that's started a business or thinking of doing so. With that, please do tell us more about how we can get in touch with your business, how we can connect, and how we can learn from you.
Absolutely. I think just like Sam, I do spend an inordinate amount of time on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn. My full name is Shruti Kapoor. My company is Wingman. The website is trywingman.com. So if you're in that journey where you're maybe looking to also capture the voice of customer, not just for yourself, but also for your product and marketing teams to benefit from, go check that out. And yeah, happy to have a conversation on LinkedIn anytime.
Awesome. We'll put all of those links over on the site at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, I want to thank you once again for coming on, Shruti. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Sam.
No worries. And if you enjoyed the show, as always, we interview business leaders each and every week to provide actionable tips across marketing, across sales, all with the goal to grow your revenue and grow your sales. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. And with that, we should catch you on the next one.